Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. So, I have been talking to you for years about the therapeutic benefits of therapy guided MDMA and the success that they have had in a lot of the studies and clinical trials because of the fine, hard, decades long work of MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. It's in Northern California, and founder Rick Doblin has really made it his life's work and has worked very tirelessly convincing people of the benefits of therapy guided psychedelic journeys for treating things like PTSD. PTSD, as you know, is critical. Treatment is so necessary, and the veteran community is very much underserved. We still have a high suicide rate and a lot of veterans who are very unhappy with the care that they receive from the VA. Part of that is the VA is very slow to accept and lobby for things like psychedelic treatments. And it's not just veterans who are sitting around acid tripping in the parking lots at fish concerts. These are the therapy aspect of this is revolutionary, and it's also critical. And that's where the high success rate has come in. In fact, in the studies that they have done, the clinical trials for the FDA, 80% of people who were given in the double blind study, so they don't know if they're being given MDMA or a placebo, 80% reported marked improvement with who had been actually given the MDMA and they didn't know it. So this has been great news, and it has been a trickle of good news, even though there's been great pushback against MAPS and other researchers and advocates for MDMA and, some of the other psychedelic substances that have also proved hopeful and successful. So we've seen year after year studies come out and anecdotally heard stories from people who have reported a cure for their PTSD, not just improvement of symptoms, which you can get mildly from some of the antidepressant, psychotropic drugs that are prescribed by doctors and psychiatrists within the VA and in private practice. Um, there has been a lot more documented data driven success with therapy guided MDMA sessions. So the feeling has been, because the news has been so positive, why wouldn't you allow more people to access this kind of treatment? And, you're not giving out party drugs. You have someone who has been diagnosed with PTSD and maybe has been resistant to other forms of treatment, meaning the talk therapy or the pills have not worked for them. A lot of people are at their wits' end and their lives have been disrupted by trauma or combat experience, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. So, a handful of people have been in these trials and have achieved great success. That should be the end of it, because the FDA, as we know, is a completely arbitrary body that keeps a lot of good products off the market for years and years for absolutely no reason. Even when they have been deemed to be safe, they have been used effectively in other countries, but people who are dying do not have access to these drugs. And that's why you've seen peripherally the right to try movement spring up over the years, because people with things like pancreatic cancer and metastatic breast cancer, they want treatments that they have not been afforded because the FDA is so slow and arbitrary.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
So, because there have been so many successful clinical trials, one would think that a rational body would look at this and say, oh, the other avenues that we have failed so many people, leading to this high rate of suffering and suicide. Therefore, let's be a little bit more open and simultaneously scientific about how we look at the data, how we read through it, and how we apply an advisory. The FDA, sorry to bury the lead, the FDA advisory panel overwhelmingly voted that MDMA has more drawbacks than benefits. You could say that about any drug, and their rationale was absolutely ridiculous. And that's why more pressure needs to be applied to lawmakers and the FDA and anyone in power who will listen, that you cannot keep a treatment off the market, and you cannot keep a treatment away from people who deserve to use it that has been overly stigmatized because of some of their rationale. And one of the things that they came up with, the negative blockers, was that too many people were excited about the prospect of MDMA actually helping them. Maybe because they had read about it, they had done the research, because they are traumatized and frustrated and want a way out of the darkness. So what are you going to do when you're in that position? Whatever you possibly can to get better. And that starts with reading about things. So of course, people were excited about the prospect of using a successful treatment for the first time that had been stigmatized and made illegal, so they cannot have access to it unless they are breaking the law. And, there are a lot of people who don't want to run afoul of the law for a number of reasons. So those people who are suffering, hardworking, and well-researched, who are excited about this, they're part of the reason that the FDA advisory panel, supposedly an independent scientific panel, said, no, we don't see enough benefits here because people want to try it. That was literally one of the reasons. One of the other reasons was that 40% of the people who entered into the 200-person study had taken some sort of psychedelic in the past. Again, because whatever they have been prescribed by their psychiatrist or, primary caregiver, it hasn't worked. And people, they try everything. They try diet, they try exercise, they try talk therapy, they try group therapy. And a lot of times, because PTSD is hard to treat, and it is so deeply wired with the structures in the brain, that sometimes those external forces don't have any impact. But what we have learned from reading about these stories is people who work with therapists before they are given MDMA, they pinpoint what the trauma is. So the therapists know what they are looking for. And then the person is given access to their own trauma through the MDMA, and they can actually re-experience their trauma almost in a 360-degree fashion, where they are able to see their trauma from different angles and therefore confront it and treat it in ways that conventional therapy and a conventionally conscious state simply would not allow them. And so, yes, there were people in the trial that had experimented with psychedelics in the past, and maybe it worked for them, and maybe they wanted more, and maybe this could be a massive psychiatric breakthrough that could help more and more people, especially people who also suffer from types of depression that are not accessible and that, again, are resistant to treatment. So the FDA has really thrown cold water on this whole thing. And it is so incredibly immoral, because we know it's going to be years before we have another shot at a breakthrough. But also, there are other clinical trials, psychedelic clinical trials, in the works. So the other thing that this advisory panel said was, well, we don't regulate psychotherapy, and since you need psychotherapy for this, we can't recommend it. So no one's asking you to regulate psychotherapy. There are plenty of psychotherapists, and MAPS is doing incredible work training more and more people in different psychology programs across the country to make sure that there are enough therapists available to meet the demand once this is given approval. But yes, you do need therapy for it, which actually makes the entire process more responsible and more effective. And just because something is not in your purview, the thing that is, you cannot withhold it from the rest of society. So whatever it takes, if you know a congressman, if you whisper in Joe Biden's creepy, decrepit, perverted ear, then tell him to put pressure on the FDA to make sure that this type of drug and therapy are approved, so people who need it most can finally get better. This has been Kennedy Saves the World. You're always so good to me. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.